Cage Calculus fans, whether you're an MMA fan, whether you're a big fan of big data, algorithms, friend, family, whatever the reason you're here, maybe you just stumbled on it by mistake. Glad you're here at Cage Calculus for 2023, where we're shaking things up with a little bit of video content for you. If you're familiar with our previews, usually you'll see a bunch of little spreadsheets with data about the fighters, their CC, their Cage Calculus rating, their pro MMA record, their ranking within their division, how many knockouts they have, how many submissions they have, what the Vegas odds are, all of those numbers, because Cage Calculus is, after all, a data-driven approach to mixed martial arts. You can still get all of that if you just scroll down in this post. If you're on the main website, cagecalculus.com, if you're there, you can still get all of that by just scrolling down, and you'll see the editor's picks. But if you are a little more familiar with the Cage Calculus previews, you know occasionally, usually on pay-per-view, but occasionally for the fight night, we'll do subjective spins on objective reality, where the editor, yours truly, puts a little more data or a little more oomph behind that data, because the algorithm can only get you so far, but it doesn't watch these fighters fight. It doesn't know the stories behind them. It doesn't know what you and I know. So we can look at the data and then put a little bit on top of that to try and figure out what's going to happen on Saturday nights inside the octagon. That's what these videos want to accomplish. That's what we're looking to do in 2023. We've got the first fight night of the year coming up. Nasruddin Imavov versus Sean Strickland, a big middleweight showdown, UFC Vegas 67. 7 prelim fights, 5 main card fights. Right now, our goal is to preview the first 3. The first 3 fights of the year, the first 3 fights of this prelim card here at UFC Vegas 67. That's this video. The rest will be previewed in another post. The other 4 prelim card fights will get their own video, and then each individual main card fight is also going to get its own video. All those 5 fights are going to get broken down individually to give you a little more subjective spin on objective reality in case you couldn't get enough. All that and more coming up, but for now, the first 3 fights of UFC Vegas 67. We've got in the women's flyweight division, Priscila Cachoeira against Sijara Eubanks at 125 pounds. 2 fighters seemingly going in opposite directions. Cachoeira has won 4 of her last 5. On the other hand, Eubanks has lost 3 of her last 4. It seems pretty straightforward, right? As you can see, the Cage Calculus algorithm is giving Cachoeira a 60.3% chance of taking this one home. All very straightforward. But you also look to see, well, wait a second, Cachoeira is also nearly a 2-to-1 underdog on the Vegas betting odds. DraftKings, FanDuel, she's going to be roughly 2-to-1 underdog anywhere. What gives? Is the algorithm wrong or are the odds makers wrong? Well, let's take a little bit of a deeper look. You see Eubanks 7-7, and as we mentioned, lost 3 of her last 4. But Eubanks' last 3 losses have been to Melissa Gatto, Pani Kianzad, and Ketlin Vieja, who's fighting in a potential title eliminator fight later in the night. We'll get to that one later. Be patient. Cachoeira, on the other hand, won 4 of her last 5, especially a very impressive round 1 KO of Ariane Lipski, the Queen of Violence, in her last time out. But you also look and see one of those wins was a decision win against Ji-Yeon Kim, and everybody, I think, except for the 3 Nevada State Athletic Commission judges watching cage side, actually thought that Ji-Yeon Kim won that fight. Unfortunately, the 3 judges sitting cage side are the only ones that count. Also, am I personally a little bit biased because I think Cachoeira should have been booted from the UFC for eye gouging Jillian Robertson to try and avoid a submission? I do, but alas, here we are. Eubanks, if you can see, the data bears this out. Her average opponent rating is significantly higher than Cachoeira's. Eubanks is also going to have a little bit of a size advantage, having previously fought at bantamweight. Coming down to flyweight, she's 1-1 since moving down to 125 pounds. I think Eubanks is going to get back in the win column. She was a contender for too long. She was a high-level fighter for too long to come out and lose to someone like Cachoeira. I think it probably is a little bit closer than the 2-1 odds that the odds makers make it, but I still think Eubanks comes out, avoids the upset, comes out, wins this by decision. I think the algorithm is leaning a little too hard into the streaks as of late, so I think in the first fight of 2023, Eubanks proves the algorithm wrong and gets back in the win column. We've got a men's flyweight. We're going across, but we're staying at 125 pounds. We've got a men's flyweight battle. Jimmy Flick coming out of retirement, where he showed up, got a submission of the year, flying triangle against Cody Durden in his UFC debut. And what did he do? He retired. But now he's coming back because he said he retired the wrong way. Absolutely true, Jimmy. You did retire the wrong way, and you owe us more stunning submissions. If you look, man, he's got 14 submissions already to his name out of 16 total wins. 14 by submission. He's not really much of a knockout threat, which is probably why the algorithm has his opponent Charles Johnson as a 51.8% favorite. Johnson's taking this fight on relatively short notice, 2 to 3 weeks short notice, because Jimmy Flick's original opponent dropped out. Now, usually in short notice fights, the short notice fighter does not win. That being said, Flick was not preparing for a fighter like Johnson, who himself has a knockout threat. Flick is going to look to get this to the ground, but Johnson also has submission threats. Has Johnson had enough time to prepare is the question. The other question is, does Jimmy Flick have enough ring rust? But I think, especially if you consider the fact that Johnson's only loss in the UFC was Muhammad Makayev, who looks absolutely unstoppable and is going to be very dangerous. I think if you look at all of that, I think the odds makers and the algorithm have it right. I lean it being a little closer. I don't know how you excuse somebody being a more than 3-1 favorite, having taken a fight on short notice. But nevertheless, Jimmy Flick's coming in with some ring rust. Charles Johnson is a little more well-rounded as a fighter, and he presents the knockout threat. I think on regular notice, Charles Johnson gets the knockout. I think he edges out roughly a 29-28 decision on short notice. That's how I see that one going down. We've got Daniel Argueta versus Nick Aguirre. I apologize to either of those men if I butchered your name. Sorry. Argueta comes in as a 51.6% favorite according to the algorithm. Again, another close one, another tight one. What the algorithm doesn't see is, again, this is a very short notice fight. Aguirre took this fight on less than a week's notice. So a week ago, he didn't even know he was potentially fighting. Now he's going in there against someone like Dan Argueta, a former LFA featherweight champion, and Argueta got thrown into the fire in his UFC debut against Damon Jackson, who's fighting in the co-main event and could very well be a featherweight contender by the end of the night. Stay tuned for that preview. So Argueta, that's the reason why his strength of schedule, his average opponent rating is so high. Aguirre, on the other hand, presents a lot of very similar skill sets. You look at both of them, similar records, similar finish rate, similar methods of finish. I think in a vacuum, the 51.6% number is probably right. But given that Aguirre is taking this on less than a week's notice, I just don't see how he gets it done. He's going to have to sell out for a finish in round one. And if he doesn't get it, he's going to tire himself out, and Argueta is going to be able to get the finish. Whether that happens by knockout or submission, I don't know, but I fully expect Argueta to get off the schneid in the UFC, get his first UFC victory against the newcomer Aguirre. But for taking the fight on less than a week's notice, major props. He's probably got a bright future in the UFC. The trio of fights that are going to start the prelim card for UFC Fight Night, Imavov versus Strickland. Stay tuned for the rest of the prelim cards, and each of the 5 main card fights, again, are going to be previewed individually to give you a little bit of more in-depth analysis, hot takes, you name it, stick around. And again, if you are a fan of the old way, the classics, you're a traditionalist, you can just skip the video and go to cagecalculus.com. If you're watching on YouTube right now, you can go to cagecalculus.com and you can just get the regular previews, the spreadsheets, all the information that I'm talking about and giving a little bit of context to. You can just see it straight, and I won't judge you. Until then, check us all out. We've got matchmaking, rankings, you name it, at cagecalculus.com. Recaps coming up, everything you could want. it's at cagecalculus.com. Check it out.